En nombre de todos los habitantes de la República del Paraguay, quiero felicitar a la Organización Internacional del Trabajo en ocasión de conmemorarse su centenario. Para nosotros es un honor haber formado parte del grupo de 44 países fundadores de la OIT. Siguiendo los principios y valores de la organización en nuestro país, estamos trabajando en forma articulada a través del diálogo social tripartito para que más paraguayos tengan acceso a un trabajo decente y formal. Estamos construyendo políticas públicas que tienen como meta crecimiento económico, un crecimiento que tenga como eje transversal el empleo digno, el acceso a la seguridad social, la igualdad en el trabajo, la erradicación del trabajo infantil y el trabajo forzoso, la no discriminación, el respeto a las garantías de libertad sindical y la negociación colectiva, así como la libre competitividad entre las empresas en condiciones de igualdad. Sabemos que no podemos hacer todo lo que nos proponemos solos y por eso consideramos a la OIT una aliada estratégica para el logro de nuestras metas. Agradecemos a la OIT por su colaboración permanente. Seguiremos impulsando la justicia social, promoviendo el trabajo decente para todos. Muchas gracias y muchas felicidades.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Our panel now will be speaking about the transformative agenda on equality at work. My name is Kevin Cassidy. I'm the quiet one on the corner. I'm going to do something slightly different because I always feel awkward introducing people because there are so many amazing people here. And if I could ask our panelists to introduce themselves, their name, their title, their affiliation, and one thing they want to challenge you with. So we're going to get it right kicked off now. So we're going to start with Liz, so please.
So my name is Liz Myers. I'm a managing associate for gender and social inclusion at Nathan Associates. Can everyone hear me? No. I don't think my microphone's on.
Are the microphones on?
Hi, my name's Liz Myers. I'm a managing associate for gender and social inclusion at Nathan Associates, an economic consulting firm. And I think one thing I want to challenge everyone in this room is to think about how do we change norms and how do we change the entire workplace culture at institutions and companies and organizations, because until we really change norms and organizational culture, we're not going to see meaningful equity and equality in the world of work.
Hello, I am Serena Fong. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs. Actually, Vice President of Strategic Engagement. Sorry, my title changed fairly recently at Catalyst. Catalyst is a nonprofit organization that works to advance women in the workplace. And one thing that I would challenge everybody here today is think about what you can do. One action, be it small, large, or what have you, that can contribute to building a more gender-inclusive workplace.
Hi, my name is JJ Rosenbaum. I'm the U.S. Director for Global Labor Justice. Global Labor Justice is a strategy hub that works with organized workers and migrants and women in the United States and in other countries to look at the new levers of the global economy, including supply chains, financialization, and migration corridors, and find ways that working people can work together across borders. If I could challenge us today, and I think this panel is going to dive right in, I'd challenge us to look not only at the college-educated workers and workers that are perhaps most likely to be influenced by technology, but also think about all kinds of workers, including really low-wage workers, the workers that will perhaps be engaged in more domestic work and more production work if others are engaged in more technology work, and really think about an economy that provides decent work for all workers, and that the decisions that we make in our personal and professional lives, how are we building that across the labor market?
Great, thank you very much. My challenge to anybody here in business, equal pay for work of equal value tomorrow. Do it right away. You want to change the world of work, do that. So let's dive right in. The ILO came out with the Future of Work report. It was recently released, and we are here talking about many of those issues. The transformative agenda for equality of work is a part of our 10 recommendations that come out of the report. The report is not an a la carte. You don't take and pick and choose what you want. It is a holistic approach to changing the world of work, which will change the economy and the social structure. Serena, and great to see you. Thank you so much for coming up here. Equal Pay Day in the U.S. was on the 2nd of April.
Yeah.
What kinds of actions can organizations take to stop the widening gender gap?
Absolutely. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's a true pleasure to be speaking to you today on this topic because it is one that I'm very passionate about, the ILO is very passionate about, and the report that they just put out is excellent. I would say that one of the first, just to give a little bit of a framework in terms of what the gender wage gap is, because I do think that there's a little bit of a confusion in terms of what it is and what it all means, which is, I'm frankly sick of the whole debate about whether or not it actually exists. And I will say that I'm pleased to see that we a shift from around, does it exist to, okay, it does exist, so what do we do about it? When we're talking about the gender wage gap, there's two areas that you're really looking at. One is pay equity within a position. So that is, if you are on, say you're on a team, there's a team of 10, 9 are men and 1 is a woman. If everybody on that team is paying the same, then an organization can say, okay, we have pay equity. And a lot of times that's what organizations say. They say, okay, well, let's see if we really have a wage gap. Well, that's what we looked at, and everybody on the team is being paid the same. However, the other element of the wage gap is if you're looking at, you have that team of 10 that's dominated by men, and they're all being paid the same. Yet you go to another team that's 9 women and 1 man, while they're all being paid the same, that team is being paid less than the team that's dominated by men. Therefore, you have a gap. And that is what we at Catalyst try to work with, and that is what this question was all designed to do in terms of how I'm going to answer. Because you cannot just take a look at, just do the analysis and do the evaluation of your systems as it is in terms of comparing. You definitely need to do that because that does still exist. And I'm sure my colleagues here in particular will be able to speak to that a little bit further. But in terms of what an organization can take to get to the issue of the wage gap between the different teams and the positions, one thing you've got to do is first conduct a thorough pay equity analysis across your organization, looking at not just individuals on the same team, but teams compared to each other. Also, just in terms of where everybody's being put forth in terms of talent development and promotion rates and hiring rates. You have to make sure that you evaluate those kinds of your retention programs, your promotion programs, and your talent development programs to see if you are giving the same opportunities for the roles that have the higher salaries to across the board. That's one. The other thing you got to, or two actually, the other thing is support pay transparency. Because one of the things that is really important is that if you don't know how much if you do have a policy where you're going to allow negotiating, it's helpful for everybody, men or women, to know what the base is, to know what those bands are, to know what they should be earning, and therefore you can ask for what you want, and you as an organization can stop the problem of biases coming in, because that leads to my next point of something that an organization can do, which it tends to be somewhat controversial, and that is banning salary negotiating. And that what I'm talking about here, though, is that with pay transparency, if you do not have to negotiate, then and it's a set salary, then you will have most likely whoever gets the job will be paid the same as those who are in those positions. One of the reasons why we say that is because even when a woman negotiates with the same skill set and she's a good negotiator, because of unconscious biases, because of the stereotyping that still exists for women, women do get penalized when they negotiate. So those are some of the things that organizations can do to close the gap.
Excellent. Can I just very briefly push back a little bit here and say that I've seen a academic recently, a woman academic saying, well, there's no pay gap. It's just the choices women make.
Right.
You want your freedom and you want more money, so what are you complaining about?
Right.
So in a very short, what's your response to that?
My response is, there's a lot that I would like to say, but I'm not gonna. First of all, there's a ton of research out there that already that has controlled for all of the different variables, choice, career pathing, all those things, and you still end up with a gap, an unexplained gap, which is, it's largely because there's still gender biases and stereotyping within hiring and advancement systems. Secondly, we did our own study where we looked at, I think it was thousands of MBA graduates from the top 26 schools, business schools around the world. And what we found is, and we did the controls for everything, and what we found is coming out of the gate, women graduates were earning $4,600 less and tracked into staff positions versus profit and loss positions. The P&L positions are where the money is, right from the get-go. And what we found is as they continued up through their careers, the gap widened in terms of their salaries. So, once you control for all of that, we still have a gap.
Right. And we see the same at the ILO. Thank you for that. Liz, we know, I think everyone here recognizes it, that women are facing barriers in the world of work. And your organization, Nathan, is very well known for promoting women in male-dominated sort of businesses and sectors. So what are some of the challenges and solutions, that you have seen in this space? What is the most effective way of addressing this, please?
Great. I would say there's probably no one effective cure-all. I think so much of it is based on context, so much is based on what that challenge is, what that sector is. For example, Nathan is doing a lot of work looking at women in the energy sector. And we are working with the energy company of Mozambique. They supply power to all of Mozambique to do a gender audit, because they see that there's a gender imbalance. They see that women are clustered in administrative positions, that there's only 20% of women in the company. And they are actually really dedicated to saying, how do we solve this problem? How do we promote an equitable working environment for women? And are looking to us to help advise on promoting gender parity in the company. So we're going to be doing a gender audit where we're going to look at pay issues. We're going to be looking at is sexual harassment or discrimination happening in the company, where these bottlenecks are. We're also going to be looking at the pipeline into the company, into the energy sector. So talking to students at the high school and university level to understand, why is this job not appealing to you? We're going to look at their policies. How do working mothers compared to working fathers or single people fare in the company? And then from there, charting a roadmap on how they can promote a more equitable environment for women. And then hopefully phase two, once we have an audit, once we have our findings, once we have these recommendations, they're really committed to not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And we'll be working with them to help design better policies, stronger, more effective policies, training women, working to address unintended bias and all these other issues. And it's great to see that there is a stakeholder that's so committed to change. But often that's not always the case. I find myself more often than not knocking down people's doors to make the case as to why this is important, why this matters to their bottom line. So we're really fortunate in this case that we don't have to. We've also done quite a bit of work looking at women in the transportation sector. And we did 3-country pilots in Malaysia, Vietnam, and Papua New Guinea, where we tested different approaches. And so one thing we did in Vietnam was looking at women entering into universities, seeing that in the transport sector, you have a lot of women in administrative positions, and then men are the pilots, men are in the senior roles, men are in the decision-making roles, and doing the much more technical or decision-making work. So we see that actually it's not an issue of competence versus, it's not an issue of competence, it's an issue of confidence. So many women in these universities just are really lacking in confidence that they can succeed in these higher level roles. So we're actually working with teachers in Vietnam to better understand how they can engage their female students to realize their potential in this industry. In Malaysia, we're testing a different approach where we looked at mentors and the idea of pairing much more senior women in the ports of Malaysia who have succeeded in this industry with younger women who are just starting out, and realizing that importance of mentorship, having women role models, having people to inspire you, but also having someone to troubleshoot with. You know, I'm experiencing this challenge in the workplace, how did you get over it? And then in Papua New Guinea, we're also looking at more institutional issues. So working with the Ministry of Transportation there to say, how do we get more women at the policy making level, having real decision-making power to influence transportation policy, and they've actually created a policy level task force on women in transportation. So there's so many things that works, but I would say, just to summarize, I think doing gender audits that look at what are the issues. You need to understand the issues before you can come up with solutions. I think mentoring, role modeling is really effective. I think working with students when they are young to better address issues of confidence, make sure they have the right skills, and then looking at that higher level policy change is also really important. And there's so much more. I could keep going on, but this is just a snapshot.
We're getting started, so we're going to really rock and roll this. So you said something which really resonates with me, which is confidence. You know, and I'm going to generalize slightly here. When men go into an interview, you know, we're very confident, right? Can you do that? Oh, of course, I've done it 100 times, right? We're not shy about overselling ourselves. I find usually that women, especially young women, feel disempowered, that they're not ready to speak up for themselves. What can the young women in this room who are looking for jobs as they move forward, what can they do specifically to keep an eye on, and how can they be more empowered in that workplace without feeling that they're pushing it too hard?
That's a great question. Research shows that women will only apply for a job when they meet 100% of the requirements versus men who will apply for a job when they meet 60% of the requirements. So that means women are only applying when they're like, I am a perfect fit for this. And men are saying, well, you know, I meet XYZ and I can really market myself. And maybe then they're getting that higher level position from the start. Or maybe they're, you know, jumping up the career ladder at a much faster pace because they're willing to push themselves a little bit. So I think one thing that's important is, you know, practicing confidence. I think it's important to practice, start small, push yourself, challenge yourself in a small way, and then keep learning and keep growing from it. I also say that, like, fake it till you make it. If you practice confidence and you pretend to be confident, even if you're terrified inside, people will not normally know that you're scared. We've done workshops for women entrepreneurs and women leaders in Africa where we did a whole session on, you know, not just the skills of being an entrepreneur, but looking at softer skills like communicating, making a business pitch, and confidence. And, you know, so many of these women had these meaningful products and thriving businesses, and were just lacking in these critical confidence skills. And having them practice every day, giving their business pitch and answering tough questions about it, and just getting up and speaking for the first time and starting small, giving positive feedback, really made a big difference. And by the end, you know, we had women who had never given a presentation before, you know, angling to be on national TV in Namibia when the news channel showed up, and they were like, oh, this is an opportunity. But you really need to practice confidence, and I think also aligned with confidence, it's about not being afraid to fail. And I know that, you know, when we fail, we beat ourselves up. We don't put ourselves forward for the next opportunity, and we let that failure haunt us, whereas men are usually able to move on a little bit quicker from that failure, take what they learned from it, and move on. So I think we also need to practice failing fast and then moving on from that.
I'm sorry, I just want to jump in here to add on to that, because I think that that's excellent. I would say the complement to that, though, is that if you aren't a young woman and you are in a position of where you can actually make a difference, this is something that how you can answer the challenge, which is that when you go into a position where if you're in a position where you can, even just speaking up about the diverse slate in terms of the candidates that's hiring for the position, speak up. Just ask, is there a diverse slate? And is the panel who's reviewing those candidates, is that diverse? Because what we have found, what research shows, is that one, you do have to have a diverse slate, because if you don't have the diverse slate, then how are you going to, then how do people get that opportunity? How will the woman, as confident as she can be, she's not going to get the job if she's not even on the slate. But at the same time, those who are actually making the selection decisions, that has to be diverse too, because what we find is that like likes like. So if it's dominated, if it's just all men who are making the decisions as to who's going to get that position, then they're most likely to gravitate towards unconscious, or whatever. Oftentimes it's not intentional, but they will unconsciously look for the candidate that is most like them.
And I know when I work with young women, I try really hard to give them positive feedback, to say what they did well, how they were successful, to pass that feedback on to other decision makers and managers in the company, so that their accomplishments and their skills are being recognized not just internally, but to the decision makers in the company. And I think that helps help them move up the career chain, but then also give them the confidence to be like, wow, I'm doing a good job. And maybe we don't always take the time to give that praise.
JJ, can you jump in there, please?
Sure, that's great. I wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about the ILO's International Labor Standard setting on gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work. And the ILO has defined gender-based violence, the Committee of Experts, as a continuum of unacceptable behaviors and practices that are likely to result in physical, psychological, or sexual harm or suffering. And that includes violence which is directed against a woman because she is a woman, or violence that affects women disproportionately. So I wanted to add this into the conversation because part of it is the barriers to entry, but then part of the reason why we have these issues we might call confidence is because there are very serious harassment and even more severe issues going on a daily basis in workplaces, from boardrooms to factory floors to everywhere in the world of work. And so I think it's really important that we're taking that into account, and that we're really looking at what are the structures, what are the structures, not only the laws, but the structures in workplaces that will change that. I think there's very good evidence-based research that where there are unions, the pay equity issues are much less, the gender-based violence issues are much less. There are many more women in senior positions, and there also are worker organizations where there are these opportunities for workers to come together and for men and women to dialogue about these issues and think about how to change the structures in the company. So I think that that's really important to put on the table as well.
Great. At the UN, we often say that it's not only the women spearheading the efforts, but changing the behaviors and attitudes of men and boys. I think that has to be looked at as well, too. We have to respect the women, not only just in the workplace, but in life more generally. JJ, I'd like to talk to you about the priorities for this transformative agenda in the world of work and equality arising for women workers, particularly in global supply chains. Can you speak a little bit about your work on that area?
Thanks, Kevin. And I hope this will tie in a bit with the discussion later. I think as we talk about the future of work, there's often it's such a big discussion, and there's a lot of anxiety around it. And so we feel like this is a new thing, these are new issues, but there is a way that those that are being disadvantaged by the future of work are those that have been disadvantaged in the workforce historically. Sometimes we talk about it as the ghost of disadvantagement of work, past, present, and future. And so I really want to put that out there in the discussion. Our work particularly looks at women workers in garment global supply chains. But I think whether you're looking at gender, race, caste, religion, migration status, these are the workers that have historically been disadvantaged, have historically been subject to contract labor, are at the lowest points in global supply chains. And so the strategies that we have learned over time and history are the strategies I think that will help us in this moment as well. We'll have to adjust them and update them, but social dialogue, strong trade unions, strong vectors for women's leadership continue to be very important. In our platform on transforming global garment supply chains, and this was developed with the Asia Floor Wage Alliance, which is a group of labor organizations, women's organizations, and trade unions in Indonesia, Cambodia, India, and Sri Lanka, 4 major garment producing countries. we've come up with a 5-point platform that we think is critical to really having a transformative future of work in these jobs, which are women-dominated. They're from 60 to 95% women in the sector, depending on the country, and most of the countries where there's approximately a 35% engagement by women in the workforce. So these are jobs that are drawing women in, and if we care about this agenda, we really have to look at them. The first is a prevention approach to gender-based violence. So really looking at what kinds of trainings do we need to engage in on the line level, the supplier level, and more broadly, and engaging both men and women, engaging both supervisors and workers, and really being very innovative. There's some work we're developing around quality circles and how that can shift to GBV-free zones. That work really has to happen with trade unions and worker organizations, as well as suppliers and brands at all the levels. The second is an economic security for women in supply chains. This is sometimes what the ILO calls social contract. But when, as the economy is shifting and women are working 15, 20 years in these fields so that their sons and daughters can be in a conversation like this about opportunities and opening of doors, we have to make sure that if that supply chain shifts, that women are getting paid the severance and the laws of their country, and that their investment of all of that work time doesn't just disappear with a supply chain change. The third is a feminist approach to living wage. And in this instance, it's very important. Oftentimes we're talking about living wage in the context of manufacturing workers, but we really want to make sure that that approach is a living wage that will then ensure a living wage for domestic workers and care workers and the other women that are working if two people are engaged in work. And so as we look at these wage discussions, we really have to look at the economy around that. The fourth is just women's leadership in organizing in unions and in collective bargaining, and making sure that at every level we're elevating women in our organizations and in our democratic organizations, as well as in work. And then finally, a fair migration agenda for garment workers as they're moving across borders.
I just wanted to drill down a little bit on that fair migration, and what we also look at is the fair recruitment, right? Because disproportionately, I think women who are looking for jobs are in very, again, disempowered positions, asymmetrical relationships. They are vulnerable to abuse and violence as well, too. I mean, what can companies do to ensure that their hiring procedures don't allow that to happen? I mean, is there something that you've done, or something that you're hoping that companies can do in order to ensure that recruitment of migrant women workers follows the rules, so to speak?
So I think there's a lot of innovation in this area, and I think it's super important. I think brands and supply chains really have to take the issue of migration into effect. And I think as we continue our broader future of work conversations, as much as we're looking at automation, we need to also be looking at migration, because with the labor markets merging globally, there are many, many people that are going to be moved through the migration agenda to do low-wage work. So it's not only an automation question. I think it's really critical. I think this will require, again, collaboration between group organizations like the ILO that have a rights-based mandate and are really looking at decent work, as well as worker organizations and migrant organizations and women's organizations, and all pieces of the supply chain. I think it's really important. Some of this work can be done through collective bargaining agreements and multi-stakeholder initiatives, but some of it has to be done at the state level. And so if you have a state immigration law that, like we have in the United States, that says that you're tied to one employer if you come as a low-wage worker, and you're on a temporary visa, which incentivizes making work more subcontracted, more temporary, more precarious, even if you have a strong worker organization and a strong employer, you're at a disadvantage, and there will be coercion built into that system. And so I think we also have to look at what can we do around prohibiting recruitment fees and other issues, but we also have to look at what are the structure of these migration programs that may incentivize making work more temporary, bringing people in that are not able to exert their labor rights, bring something forward without feeling like they're going to lose that job and just simply be replaced by someone new.
Excellent. We're going to go into a little more of a rapid fire sort of questioning, and I'm going to do I'll use an old term, Jerry Springer, go out into the audience, and I'm going to pick on you. Serena, if I can go to you about the Catalyst Awards conference this year. Mm-hmm. You were focusing on the future at work.
Yep.
Why was that chosen, and what was discussed? What really resonated with you?
I think one of the reasons why we decided to go with future at work is because of the conversation that preceded our conversation. It's so relevant today. It's about, when you think about the future of work, it's here already. We have all of the movements that are happening. To your point about sexual harassment, the Me Too movement has exploded. And there's all of these, the technological advances are coming into play. And what we found is that you've got to look at it from a gender lens in order for companies and organizations to advance, and in order to build that more gender inclusive work environment. I mean, the examples that have popped up already, if you look more at the issue of technology, and the development of technology, because there are so few women in the development of technology and who have those opportunities, you have things coming up like when somebody created the first voice activated, the Alexas and things like that. What they found is that they couldn't, it wouldn't recognize higher pitched voices, higher pitched tones. There was another one in terms of race ethnicity, that it was a scanning thing so you could get soap or something like that. It couldn't recognize darker pigmentation. So it's things like that. I mean, you go all the way to the one that I remember most vividly is with Apple's iPad. When the name first, and yes, I'm old enough to know when it first came out. When they first announced it, and they said, okay, we're introducing the iPad, women across the world said, really? That's what you want to call it? So it's those kinds of decisions and those things that are happening that made us realize that we need to do this. We need to focus our conference on the future at work, and that's what. And so we had discussions around gender and diversity when you create AI. We also looked at the recruiting, when you look at for the technical, those kinds of positions, what are you doing? How are you specifically doing those kinds of recruiting, based on, you look at the skills, but much to what the previous panel said in terms of those soft skills, you still, you need those kinds of skills there so that you know who to hire. So it was also to what you were just talking about, the migration panels, patterns, that one of the things that we looked at about is that how organizations, companies can benefit from the geographically dispersed workforce. So it was those kinds of things that made us realize that this is, for when we're trying to talk to these companies and these organizations, this is what we want to tell them in terms of how to meet the future of the workplace and the workforce, and that the future is now.
Can I add something about the sexual harassment topic?
Please.
I'm so happy to hear this is an integral part of the conversation. I think it's often written off as GBV and secondary to the workplace, but it's such an integral workplace issue. A study of sexual harassment among U.S. government workers found that the estimated cost of sexual harassment in just a 2-year period was $327 million. And it's not just about lawsuits when these claims go forward and the cost of that and how that affects a company's brand or image, but it leads to job turnover, sick leave, personal leave, and then also individual productivity on the job. But what was really interesting about this survey is that they estimated that 61% of the total cost was due to reduced work group productivity. So it wasn't just on the person who was being harassed, but overall declines in productivity based on the entire work group, and as well as the harasser, who's also leading to declines in productivity. So to me, this is like a really crucial issue when it comes to the future of work and productivity, because it's not just the person who's being harassed. It's not just affecting their career, but it's affecting the entire working environment. And until companies can really comprehensively and meaningfully first accept that and then address it, we're not going to see a shift here.
So Kevin, I wanted to see if I could jump in. We're really lucky today to have 2 sisters from Unite Here, which is the hotel worker union that are based here in Pennsylvania. I don't know if they want to raise their hand, but they're innovating on two very important areas, and we want to say that innovation comes from Silicon Valley, but it also comes from our trade unions and on the issue both of thinking about how to build a movement against sexual harassment for hotel workers around the world. They have innovative ideas, and they also have a really important initiative called the Fair Hotel Initiative. I have the app on my phone, so I hope after this everyone will get it. You can put in where you're going to go and look for hotels that are protecting their workers against sexual harassment and protecting freedom of association. So it's a really great, again, like cutting-edge strategy.
So here's the rubber meets the road. So can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So my name is Caitlin Jerdrum, and I'm with Unite Here. Our union represents 270,000 hospitality workers across the United States and Canada, and we are currently working in support of Marriott hotel workers in their campaign to protect themselves from sexual harassment and assault on the job. Sexual harassment is pervasive throughout the industry. Housekeepers very often work alone, making it very easy for guests to corner them in guest rooms. Having surveyed thousands of our members, we know that many women have experienced sexual harassment at work. Marriott is the biggest hotel company in the world. 51% of their employees are women, and many are people of color and immigrants. Last year, Marriott workers struck for and won greater sexual harassment protections, which was a historic step towards ending the pervasive problem of sexual harassment in the hotel industry, though that did not address sexual harassment company-wide. Marriott asks employees to report incidents of sexual harassment, but when they were asked to report the total number of incidents to their shareholders, they refused. Marriott only disclosed the number of formal legal complaints, 44 out of 177,000 employees over 5 years worldwide. They did not report the total number of complaints, investigations, arbitrations, or settlements. Now, according to the EEOC's Select Task Force on the study of harassment in the workplace, anywhere from 25 to 85% of women have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, and only 6 to 13% of individuals who experience harassment file a formal complaint. We are demanding that Marriott tell the truth about the real number of incidents of harassment and assault in their hotels and engage in dialogue with employees, especially survivors, to create and implement solutions globally. Now, Marriott's annual meeting is coming up in a couple months, and we want to make sure that they hear a strong response. We are organizing a group of experts and leaders like yourselves to sign a letter to Marriott demanding that they take this seriously, and I would love the chance to speak with you about it. There's also a petition anyone can sign at metoomarriott.org. Marriott needs to believe survivors, protect their employees, and tell the truth about their hotels. Thank you.
So here we're talking about some of these concerns. Maybe just a show of hands. Are most of the women here looking at jobs? Is that a concern for you? Is sexual harassment a concern?
Oh, yeah.
In what way? In what way? And if we could be just very brief, all right?
Well, I think it matters how we feel and what happens to us and what happens to our bodies. So why wouldn't it be a concern is more of a question.
And should there be legal frameworks in place? Do you think that there should be penalties if you're sexually harassed?
Yes, I think there should be harsh penalties and like to prove an example for every workforce that they won't tolerate it.
So if I can turn to you, Liz, I mean, Nathan, as you know, you're working at these legal and regulatory barriers. You've come up with some findings. We're talking about gender-based violence in the workplace. I mean, how are you addressing this through your global development network?
Sure. I mean, I think the policy level is a great way to start, and there are many countries in the world that don't have formal legislation about sexual harassment. And I think also expanding our definition of sexual harassment. It doesn't just happen in the workplace. It happens on the way to work, in public places, on public transportation, and how might that affect a woman from taking a certain job or working certain hours? Maybe she has to stay late, but then is it dangerous for her to get back home? As well as in education. What happens when you're staying late in the lab or you're being harassed by your professor? How would that dissuade a woman to enter into a career or a certain technical field, especially one that's male-dominated? And countries around the world, legislation on and policies on sexual harassment in education and public places is really few and far between. So while we're seeing some progress in terms of legislation on sexual harassment in the workplace, it's not most countries are not adopting a wider definition that's looking at it. One thing that we did working with APEC and all the economies in APAC is we did this Healthy Women, Healthy Economies toolkit that looks at how, you know, it's healthy economies will thrive. Economies will thrive when its women workers are healthy, and looking at sexual harassment. And so we had metrics and policy guidelines that different APAC economies could adopt to help promote sexual harassment. And it was a toolkit at that policy level for all of these economies to help make that connection between sexual harassment and the economy, to say this is something that is worth investing in. You need to adopt policy level change to do this. I think something else we're not seeing a lot of is gender-sensitive policy development. Quite often policies are gender blind. Women are often not included in consultations, opportunities to comment on that policy, on dissemination, and you usually don't have a gender review, a gender analysis that looks at how will women benefit from that policy, how can they contribute to that policy. And so one thing Nathan is doing, we work quite a bit at the policy level, and so we're helping to ensure that as policies are designed and developed and implemented, they're done so in a gender-sensitive way. And so that's something, for example, in Mozambique, we have an economic policy project, and we're working with the team to make sure that its labor policy, for example, its commercial code policy, that all of them are gender-sensitive as opposed to gender-blind.
Right. You wanted to feed back into that.
I just have a question. Hi, my name is Jessica Dresch. I'm a student at Ithaca College. In light of talking about just like sexual harassment and work, I just wanted to hear your opinions on the legalization of sex work in the U.S.
JJ, can you do that, and then Serena, and then Liz? We can do a little rapid fire, and we'll get some people in the audience engaged in that. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the question. And I think that ties into some of the work that the ILO is doing with the initiative 8.7 to prohibit forced labor and trafficking, and the way some of the discussions about trafficking lend towards ignoring labor trafficking and severe forms of labor exploitation and lead into being anti-prostitution. I think many of the unions around the world and our organization do see that sex work is an important element of work that women often end up in because of failure of other opportunities, or choose to be in because of the choices that the limited choices that they have. And so I think the question that we have is, how do we raise labor standards for all forms of work all around the world? How do we make sure worker organizations exist that can be involved in that? And again, how do we not get focused on certain sectors that perhaps we understand more than others? I did want to note that when Kevin asked his question earlier, you could see the women in the room were all sort of like, do I raise my hand? Of course, I'm thinking about it. But no men raised their hand. And so I really want to call out that that in order to change this scenario, it's going to require that in interviews, it's not only women asking about, is there a sexual harassment policy? What are your, as the data points that were raised by the Sisters at Unite, what are your sexual harassment, how many times have you been complained, and what's the resolution? And I think what the best data shows on sexual harassment training as well is that we don't want to make there no instances of complaints. We just want to make that if there are behaviors that are concerning, that they are brought forward and they are resolved, and that the culture changes in these institutions. And so I really want to challenge the folks that are going into interviews as students, that this is a question that's coming up across the board, and that you have strategies in your student groups of how to make this a question that's comfortable to ask. Maybe the school needs to ask it and have these kinds of questions part of what's coming in at the time of recruitment.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? Okay, mate, you're the sacrificial male. Okay, respond.
To what question?
You've not been paying attention.
No, I haven't. Obviously, in terms of sexual harassment in the workplace, I think it's something important, and I think it's something that really we need to ask ourselves too. What kind of culture are we creating? If men such as myself and my generation, as we go into the workforce, we need to work on promoting women's equality within the workforce, and also to help prevent sexual harassment. We need to create a culture that treats women as our equals in the workplace, as we help, to develop, whether we're in the business world developing a product, whether we're in the science field, we need to see them as our equals and work towards a common goal rather than just, a lesser person as some men perceive women to be.
Okay, well, I think that's great, and you keep him honest on this, okay? Serena, can I ask you to kind of give a framework, and then, of course, Liz, and then we'll jump to one or two more questions. I think we're running out of time. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the issue around that the first young lady mentioned about the sex work, it's outside of the scope of Catalyst, and I honestly don't know enough to say to weigh in on that. I will say, though, however, to JJ's point, that it is about working to build more gender-inclusive workplaces as well as access to those jobs that for everybody. So I think that's all I can contribute.
Yeah, same here, but I would add to the point on engaging men. I think when we're talking about what men can do, I think you also have to look at care and the immense time burden that women encounter when they provide the majority of the care work for both children as well as elders around the world. They spend up to 3 times or more time on care work, and how that is going to be a fundamental barrier and blockage to women's advancement in the workplace when they're basically working a second job. And so I think I'm challenging them in the room to also think about the time you spend in the family, also looking at parental leave policies. Usually you have, well, the U.S. does not have maternity leave, and we're the only developed country that does not. In countries around the world where you do have maternity leave, it's usually 3 months or more, and men have a week. And so that needs to be even, because there's going to be all these unintended negative consequences of well-intentioned policies if men are not taking parental leave. And usually when parental leave is available, women take it more than men. So it's about making sure there are policies towards parental leave, and then when it's available, that men take it. Because without that, women are always going to be valued less than men in the workplace, because they're going to say they're going to take time out. Men are not. So let's invest more in men.
I want to first give a shout out to the gentleman who has been walking his child around in that stroller.
Yeah.
Power to you, brother. I love it. Can I open up a question to this young lady here, please?
Hi, my name's Niall. I also attend Ithaca College. And so I was curious about something that Ms. Rosenbaum mentioned. She talked about like elevating women's leadership in the workplace, and then also going off on gender-based violence. And I am curious about how you can make sweeping generalizations about the woman's experience when not taking account trans women and women of color, and how those experiences don't correlate to the experience of white women. And I would like you to kind of elaborate on how you would approach the intersectionality of those things.
Sure, and I think it's a very important point, and the data that I'm providing is from very specific research that we did in 4 countries in the garment sector, and so I'm not intending to make sweeping generalizations, and I'm sorry if that's how it came across.
I would add that I think women are often looked at as this monolithic group, and understanding nuances based on educational background, location, urban versus rural, racial status, ethnicity, religion is really important, and it's often a challenge just to get people to think about women, let alone to think about intersectionalities. It's really interesting. I've done the majority of my work in sub-Saharan Africa, so it's been really interesting, in working in these contexts where race is sometimes not as much of a factor, but gender, ethnicity, educational background, and those become more of factors. But obviously, yes, I think that's a great point, that when you look at sexual orientation and you look at ethnicity and racial background, that the obstacles are just multiplied for these women.
I think I would add to that, personally, as a woman of color, that is a very important issue. And it's something that I individually make a point about stressing because think about this. When we're saying all women, or when we just use the term women, the default is you're talking about white women. That's not my default. My default is we're talking all women. So what I do is when I put out, so I'm in our marketing department at Catalyst, and I also was a news producer for several years prior to my time at Catalyst. But what I do is we do make a point to say all women, including women of color. So we call it out so that people understand that it's the default should not be and cannot be that when you think all women, you think just white women. So I think that's a great point, and I do think that your research, I'm sure, was covering people from women from all different race ethnicities.
So I've snuck over here. I have one last question from a young lady sitting next to me. Please, Kira, if you would.
Hi, my name's Kira Stevenson, and I'm a student here at Lehigh. I just had a question about when reflecting on all your very accomplished careers, I was wondering what you believe is your most important or influential characteristic that you have that helped in breaking through lower level promotional tournament discrimination and working in a male-dominated workplace.
Do we have time for the master's class on this? Please, if you could be rapid, and then we'll just close after that, please.
Yeah, I would say, for me, I'm going to look at it both sides of the coin. I have, in the two biggest jobs of my career at Nathan and my job before that at Banyan Global, I had women bosses. And I think having women bosses, they really challenged me, but they supported me when I needed help, and then they pushed me to thrive and not just survive in the workplace. And so I think that, to me, was a very significant defining factor. But I also think I have a lot of persistence and a lot of grit. And I think that has played a role. I think I'm pretty assertive. I am okay to say no. I'm okay to challenge people. And I think that also really helped because I was always putting myself forward and giving out my ideas. And that really helped me thrive in the workplace as well.
Right. I think for me, it was really intentionality and focus. I knew what I wanted to do, but at the same time, I knew that in order to do that, it's the problem-solving skills that I've developed just throughout, just in terms of life, school, and what have you, is, again, I go back to the previous panel talking about, when going about you're looking at it for a specific field. What I'm also take away from that, though, is, and why I think a college education, regardless, and to your point, regardless of what college you go to, what it gives you is, even if you don't stay in your major, 9 times out of 10, you usually don't. What you do develop, though, is just interpersonal skills. You do develop problem-solving skills. So I did research. I figured out and seeked out mentors, sponsors, advocates to figure out how to learn about the position, learn how to structure my goals and my resume to figure out how to advance.
Yeah, I would say curiosity and ability to learn how to learn. And that I would think that often comes from finding women mentors in your family, in your career, in your political organizations. But to be able to come into these jobs the jobs themselves are changing. No one has 100% of the skills because the job didn't exist or the way your job is constructed. And so the ability to figure it out in a way that with an equal part of stubbornness and humility, that's what makes women able to lead everyone. And I think not to be stereotypical, but that when women have that makes them able to succeed.
But look for male mentors, sponsors, and advocates too, mainly, for a variety of reasons, but one big one is that they're still in power. So.
Until you are. Listen, I think we can go on with this for another several hours, and I just want to say that I'm really grateful to the audience, and I'm sorry if it was a little distracting, but I wanted to kind of get the pulse of the room in this. I would just like to close to say that the ILO believes in a measurable agenda for women. I think it's very important that we look at this as not just token nods to that. There has to be legal frameworks. There has to be metrics looking at women's opportunities in the workforce, in the wider society. And let's really try to be more tolerant. I'm extremely impressed by the younger generation today coming up, that they are seeing the diversity. They see it in the sense of celebration instead of separateness. And I think that's really something that's really quite important. I'm going to close here with just a very rapid fire here, something that some of you older people will know, which is called Mad Libs or Ad Libs. I'm going to start a sentence, and I want you to finish that for me. Yes, I know, it's terrible. This wasn't in the plan. All right? The future of work is...
Female.
Gender, race, ethnicity, inclusion.
Inclusive, and one where care burdens are also addressed.
Liz, Serena, and JJ, thank you so much. And everyone, please, a round of applause for some wonderful speakers.
Hi, my name is Andrew Ward. I'm a professor of management here.
Whereas universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based upon social justice.
Considerando que existen condiciones de trabajo que entrañan tal grado de injusticia, miseria y privaciones para gran número de seres humanos.
以致产生如此巨大的动荡，使世界和平与和谐遭受危害。
Принимая во внимание срочную необходимость улучшения этих условий.
Par exemple, en ce qui concerne la réglementation des heures de travail, la fixation d'une durée maximum de la journée et de la semaine de travail,
Regelung des Arbeitsmarktes, Verhütung der Arbeitslosigkeit.
وتوفير أجر يكفل ظروف معيشة مناسبة.
Protección del trabajador contra las enfermedades, sean o no profesionales, y contra los accidentes de trabajo.
La protection des enfants, des adolescents et des femmes.
Пенсии по старости и инвалидности.
Protection of the interests of workers when employed in countries other than their own.
Anerkennung des Grundsatzes gleicher Lohn für gleichwertige Arbeit.
承认结社自由的原则。
Organización de la enseñanza profesional y técnica y otras medidas análogas.
Attendu que la non-adoption par une nation quelconque d'un régime de travail réellement humain
is an obstacle in the way of other nations which desire to improve the conditions in their own countries.
فإن الأطراف السامية المتعاقدة تقرر مدفوعة بمشاعر العدالة والإنسانية.
А также желанием обеспечить прочный мир во всем мире.
并为实现本序言所提出的各项目标
Agreed to the following constitution of the International Labour Organization.
The ILO has a constitutional responsibility to build a future of work which corresponds to our mandated goals of social justice. We have 100 years of experience in making our world a fairer, safer place to work and a better place to live.
The future of work is basically putting people first.
So this report is going to be timely because it will address the challenges that many working people are having.
I really hope that this report will help the future of work be more human-centric.
That we have to act now on the changes happening in the world of work, because change is there, but it's not clear yet whether to the worse or to the better.
It is inclusive of all. It's about equity, it's about social dialogue, and it's about social justice.
Concrete recommendations which will be valid for industry, valid for governance, valid for unions, valid for everybody.
This is about the way the future of our work is going to be framed. So I think this report is extremely important for young people.
It is very important for us to promote the lifelong active society in which the wills and the abilities of people of all generations can be fully realized.
We're out to change thinking, change ideas in the world of business, and get government focused once again on what really matters, and that's the conditions of their own people and their own citizens.
Investing in rural workers and rural economy, the informal workers, and in the care economy.
What will be the social contract of the future? What will be the rights of the workers? What will be the respect for the workers?
Make sure that we are ready to embrace the future as it comes and treat people as we move forward with the respect that they deserve and place them at the center of everything that we do.